When Japan launched its surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, it believed America would be too broken to fight back. But the smoldering ruins only ignited something deeper: unity. Within hours, recruitment lines stretched around city blocks. America's factories, silent for years, came alive with the roar of machines. The Axis had woken a power unlike any they'd ever faced. Admiral Yamamoto himself foresaw the danger, whispering that Japan had awakened a sleeping giant. In weeks, the U.S. Navy was rebuilding, designing faster, stronger ships. What was meant to cripple the Pacific Fleet instead forged the unstoppable will of a nation at war. By 1943, Japan's admirals began to grasp the scale of their mistake. The Essex-class carriers, vast, deadly, and arriving by the dozen, transformed the Pacific into America's domain. Every ship Japan lost stayed lost. Every ship America lost was replaced in months. The Pacific became a stage for industrial warfare, and Japan was outmatched. Radar, logistics, and relentless air power defined a new era. American pilots dominated the skies, their fleets stretching from horizon to horizon. Japan's naval elite, once confident in their superiority, realized they were no longer hunters, they were the hunted. When American Sherman tanks rolled through Normandy, German generals stood in disbelief. Their Tigers were superior, yes, but there were too few. The Americans didn't fight with individual machines. They fought with overwhelming production. For every Tiger destroyed, 10 more Shermans filled the gap. Factories in Detroit, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh poured armor into Europe like a river of steel. The Germans learned that America's greatest weapon wasn't technology. It was its ability to outproduce, outrepair, and outlast. What they called the material war was already lost before they realized it. On Pacific Islands soaked in rain and blood, Japanese troops met an unfamiliar rhythm of gunfire. Fast, precise, unending. The M1 Garand had arrived. While their own bolt-action rifles fired one shot at a time, Americans unleashed 8 in seconds. General Patton called it the greatest battle implement ever devised. It wasn't just a rifle. It was an idea. Mass efficiency meeting perfect engineering. The Garand turned every soldier into a force multiplier. Japan's courage met America's innovation, and courage alone was no longer enough. Over the skies of Germany, the thunder of B-17 flying fortresses echoed across the clouds. These bombers came in formation, waves of steel that blotted out the sun. German flak batteries fired until their barrels glowed. But more bombers came the next day. The Luftwaffe couldn't stop the tide. The American strategy was brutal in its simplicity. Bomb, rebuild, and bomb again. Each strike crippled factories, fuel depots, and morale. By 1944, even hardened German soldiers whispered one truth: when the fortresses come, the war comes with them. German U-boats once ruled the Atlantic, sinking Allied shipping with terrifying success. But then came America's answer: the Liberty ship. Built in mere weeks, these cargo vessels turned the tide of logistics. For every ship sunk, 2 more replaced it before the month ended. It wasn't heroism, it was mathematics. The Germans couldn't match America's industrial rhythm. Hitler's admirals realized too late that they weren't fighting just convoys. They were fighting factories. Each Liberty ship that left port carried the pulse of a nation, determined to never run out. When the first B-29s appeared over Japan, their size and altitude defied belief. They flew higher, faster, and carried more destruction than anything Japan had faced. Entire cities vanished overnight under waves of firebombs. Tokyo burned as Japanese officers watched helplessly from bunkers. The empire's reach, once vast, shrank under the glow of its own flames. The B-29 wasn't just a bomber. It was America's declaration that distance no longer offered safety. Japan's home islands were now battlefields. German troops prided themselves on discipline and precision, but when they faced the American supply machine, they were astonished. Every U.S. soldier had fresh rations, warm clothes, and ammunition in abundance. The front lines were never empty, the rear lines never silent. The German Wehrmacht began calling it the pipeline. Trucks, trains, and ships worked in flawless harmony. America's strength was not only in its soldiers, but in its ability to keep them fed, fueled, and fighting. Even before battle began, logistics had already chosen the victor. The Battle of Midway shattered Japan's naval dreams. 4 carriers gone in days, their best pilots lost forever. America's codebreakers, intelligence, and strategy outmaneuvered a nation that once believed it couldn't lose at sea. In Tokyo, silence replaced confidence. The High Command understood then, America didn't just fight with weapons. It fought with information, technology, and adaptation. Midway marked more than a victory. It was the moment Japan realized the Pacific no longer belonged to them. At first, German pilots mocked the P-47. Heavy, clumsy, slow. Then they met it in the skies. The Thunderbolt could dive faster, absorb punishment, and strike with terrifying force. Its 8 50 caliber guns shredded armor and railways alike. When American pilots learned to escort bombers deep into German territory, Luftwaffe aces faced a new nightmare. Every dogfight turned into survival. The P-47 wasn't elegant. It was relentless, and in the roar of its engines, the Axis heard the voice of American power. On June 6, 1944, the beaches of Normandy erupted in fire and steel. The Germans had fortified the Atlantic Wall for years, believing it impenetrable. But as the sun rose, they saw an ocean filled with ships, more than 5,000 vessels stretching to the horizon. American paratroopers dropped behind their lines. Tanks rolled ashore, and the sky thundered with Allied planes. German officers, stunned by the scale, realized that no defense could stop this flood. D-Day wasn't just a battle. It was the moment America proved it could move heaven and earth to crush tyranny. In the scorching sands of North Africa, Field Marshal Rommel met an enemy unlike any other. The Americans were inexperienced, but relentless. With every defeat, they adapted, learning faster than anyone expected. At Kasserine Pass, the Germans triumphed. But months later, the Americans returned with precision, logistics, and unyielding will. Their supply lines stretched flawlessly across deserts. Their armor coordination improved daily. Rommel knew then, America's strength was evolution. Every loss turned into a lesson, and every lesson into a new kind of power. The B-24 Liberator flew higher, faster, and carried more bombs than most aircraft of its time. When formations of these bombers darkened the European sky, German soldiers braced for devastation. Even when anti-aircraft guns roared and Messerschmitts intercepted, the bombers kept coming. Day after day, the factories that built Germany's war machine crumbled under precision strikes. America's air power wasn't just dominance. It was inevitability. Each mission brought the Reich one step closer to ruin. After Midway, the U.S. launched an unrelenting campaign, island by island, mile by mile. Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, each name carved in blood and determination. The Japanese fought fiercely, but the Americans kept coming. For every island lost, Japan's perimeter shrank. The island hoppers, as they were called, perfected amphibious warfare. Coordinated assaults, naval bombardments, and air superiority turned every invasion into a storm. Japanese generals began to understand. America's strategy wasn't speed. It was inevitability. When the Americans brought their artillery to Europe, the battlefield changed forever. Precision, power, and sheer volume defined their fire. The Germans called it drum fire, but this was more. It was an orchestra of destruction. American gunners calculated trajectories with deadly accuracy. Their barrages broke counterattacks before they began. In the Ardennes and beyond, waves of shells crushed morale and machinery alike. German veterans whispered, "When the Americans start firing, the ground itself turns against us." Beneath the Pacific waves, America unleashed its silent killers, submarines that turned Japan's empire into an isolated fortress. Merchant ships vanished, oil tankers burned, and entire convoys disappeared without a trace. The Japanese Navy could no longer supply its troops or fuel its planes. Every victory turned hollow as the ocean became America's weapon. By 1945, Japan's economy was strangled, not by armies, but by unseen predators that never stopped hunting. As the war dragged on, American innovation accelerated. Rocket artillery, guided bombs, and proximity fuses appeared on the front lines. German soldiers found themselves shelled with unimaginable accuracy. Their counterfire useless. The proximity fuse alone transformed air defense. Shells exploded with perfect timing, shredding aircraft and infantry alike. Scientists in Berlin realized too late that America's technology had surpassed theirs. The U.S. wasn't just winning battles, it was rewriting warfare itself. By late 1944, the skies over Europe and the Pacific belonged to America. P-51 Mustangs escorted bombers deep into enemy territory, annihilating what remained of the Luftwaffe and the Japanese Zero squadrons. The air war was no longer a contest. It was a massacre. Axis pilots flew knowing their missions were suicide. America's industrial might had translated into air dominance. The war, once fought on land and sea, was now won in the heavens. The jungles and tunnels of Saipan became a nightmare for Japan's defenders. American Marines, equipped with flamethrowers and grenades, flushed them from every hole and cave. The Japanese fought to the last man, but fire and steel always prevailed. What broke the high command wasn't the loss of the island, but the realization that America would stop at nothing. Every inch of ground was taken through unstoppable will. Saipan was the death of Japan's dream of victory, and the birth of their final desperation. After D-Day, thousands of American trucks, the Red Ball Express, thundered across France, delivering supplies at a pace the world had never seen. Fuel, ammunition, food, an endless lifeline feeding the Allied advance. German generals couldn't comprehend how the Americans sustained such movement. Soldiers joked that America's real army was its logistics. But behind the humor lay truth. Without fuel, tanks are statues. Without food, soldiers are ghosts. The Red Ball Express ensured America's momentum never died, and the German front lines never rested. In December 1944, Hitler gambled everything on one last strike, the Ardennes offensive. Snow, fog, and confusion engulfed the forests. The Germans called it the Battle of the Bulge. At first, they broke through. American lines buckled, but they did not shatter. In Bastogne, surrounded and outnumbered, American paratroopers refused to surrender. Their one-word reply to the Germans, "Nuts," became legend. Reinforcements soon arrived, tanks pushed forward, and the Bulge collapsed. The world saw it clearly. Even in the coldest winter, America's resolve burned hotter than ever. The volcanic island of Iwo Jima was a fortress of stone and fire. The Japanese swore no American would ever take it. Then came the Marines, wave after wave, crawling through black ash under relentless artillery. The cost was horrific, but they advanced. When the flag rose atop Mount Suribachi, it became a symbol not only of victory, but of sacrifice. Japan's leaders saw the photo and knew, if America could conquer Iwo Jima, they could conquer anything. The empire's last line of defense was crumbling, inch by inch. By 1945, the thunder of American artillery echoed from the Rhine to the Alps. German civilians, once confident in victory, now hid from endless bombing raids. Cities became ruins, morale collapsed. When American tanks rolled into towns, many German soldiers dropped their weapons, choosing surrender over hopelessness. They realized they weren't fighting monsters. They were facing men who represented a new world order. For the first time, the sound of approaching engines meant not fear, but the end of a nightmare. The B-25 Mitchell was fast, deadly, and precise. American pilots used it to devastating effect across the Pacific, striking ships, convoys, and airfields. Japan's destroyers, once proud and swift, were caught off guard by its speed and firepower. The B-25's 8-gun nose unleashed storms of lead. Japanese sailors called it the dragon that breathes bullets. Each sortie weakened Japan's navy and morale. For them, the war that once began in triumph now turned into endless retreat under American skies. After the Normandy invasion, the Allies launched Operation Cobra, a breakout so ferocious it tore open the German front. American bombers flattened defensive lines. Tanks surged through the gaps. Within days, German divisions crumbled under the unstoppable momentum. General Bradley's forces advanced like a steel tide. Towns liberated, bridges seized. Enemy morale shattered. America's offensive machine had no equal. What the Axis once called untrained had become a war-winning force. The myth of German invincibility died on the roads of France. The F-6F Hellcat ruled the Pacific skies. Rugged, powerful, and forgiving to fly, it destroyed the legendary Japanese Zero squadrons that once dominated. Pilots fresh from training shot down veterans who had survived since Pearl Harbor. In every major battle, the Marias, Leyte, Okinawa, the Hellcat reigned supreme. Japan's air power dissolved before its guns. By 1945, the rising sun could no longer rise. America owned the skies, and Japan's dream of empire sank beneath the waves. Deep in Berlin's war rooms, German economists made a grim discovery. America's monthly steel output was more than Germany's entire yearly capacity. For every plane Germany built, America built 10. For every ship lost, America launched 3. The numbers were staggering, and they told the truth no one could ignore. Germany could never outlast an enemy whose factories ran on endless resources and freedom-driven innovation. War, at its core, was production, and America had already won. On the night of March 9th, 1945, the sky above Tokyo burned. B-29s rained firebombs across the city, creating a storm hotter than molten metal. Wooden homes vanished in waves of heat. Tens of thousands perished. For the Japanese leadership, it was unbearable proof that the homeland was no longer untouchable. Every warning, every strategy had failed. The firebombing of Tokyo wasn't just destruction, it was revelation. Japan had awakened the most fearsome industrial force in human history, and it would not stop until the war was over. General George S. Patton led his Third Army like a storm. Fast, decisive, and ruthless. He broke through German defenses faster than they could react. His armored divisions swept across France, crossing rivers before the enemy even knew where he was. German officers nicknamed him the American Rommel, but even Rommel never had such momentum. Patton's philosophy was simple: attack and keep attacking. The Wehrmacht had no answer for that kind of fury, backed by infinite fuel and flawless coordination. By 1944, German scientists whispered about a terrifying rumor. The Americans were building a weapon beyond imagination. Intelligence reports confirmed it, a bomb born from the power of atoms themselves. While Germany's labs were crippled by shortages and bombings, America's Manhattan Project thrived in secrecy. Thousands of the world's greatest minds worked under one flag, in perfect silence. When the truth finally emerged in August 1945, the world would never be the same, and Germany realized just how far behind they had fallen. August 6, 1945. A single plane, the Enola Gay, flew above Hiroshima. Moments later, a flash brighter than the sun ended an entire city. Japan's military command received the reports. No gunfire, no fleet, just annihilation. For the first time, silence filled Tokyo's war rooms. Scientists confirmed it. America had unlocked the power of the universe. The empire's bravest generals stood powerless before an invisible force that shattered their future in seconds. It wasn't just a bomb. It was the arrival of a new era, one America now commanded. 3 days later, another light, this time over Nagasaki. The second atomic strike ended all illusions of resistance. Japan's military wanted to fight on, but Emperor Hirohito broke centuries of silence. In his historic broadcast, his voice trembled through the radio. We must endure the unendurable. For millions, that meant surrender. The empire that had once sought to dominate Asia bowed to the overwhelming might of the United States. The world witnessed not just the end of a war, but the rise of a new superpower. As Allied troops advanced into Germany, scientists who had worked for the Reich surrendered, not to the Soviets, but to the Americans. They knew who truly held the future. Operation Paperclip soon followed, bringing Germany's best minds into America's laboratories. It wasn't humiliation, it was survival. The very architects of German rockets and weapons now served under the stars and stripes. America hadn't just won the war, it had inherited the genius of its enemies and turned it toward progress, science, and space. After the war, Japan expected vengeance. Instead, American engineers arrived not with rifles, but with blueprints. Roads, schools, and factories rose from ruins. The same industrial energy that had crushed the empire now rebuilt it. Japan's leaders, stunned, watched a miracle. The conqueror had become a creator. The U.S. occupation didn't humiliate, it transformed. In a few short years, Tokyo's skyline shimmered again, powered by American ideas and partnership. It was the final proof. America's true strength wasn't destruction, but renewal. Post-war Germany expected endless punishment. Instead, it received the Marshall Plan. Billions in aid flowed from America to rebuild the very continent it had once fought. Factories restarted, homes were rebuilt, and hunger ended. For ordinary Germans, it was bewildering. Why would a victor rebuild its enemy? But that was America's difference. Power guided by principle. The world saw that the same nation capable of total war was equally capable of total compassion. The real victory was moral. By 1946, the world was divided, yet united in one realization. The United States was unlike any power in history. Its industries, untouched by war, fed a global recovery. Its soldiers came home to prosperity, not ruin. From Hollywood to Detroit, from the Pentagon to Wall Street, America stood as the center of the new age. Nations looked west, not out of fear, but out of awe. The sleeping giant that Yamamoto once warned of had fully awakened, and the world would never sleep again. On remote islands, isolated Japanese soldiers kept fighting years after surrender, believing the war still raged. When they finally learned the truth, that Japan had lost and America had rebuilt it, disbelief turned to silence. Some wept, some saluted the unseen enemy they'd once fought. The truth was undeniable. America had not only defeated an empire, it had given it new life. Even the most loyal soldiers saw that the empire's fall had created something stronger. Peace under American guidance. Berlin lay in ruins, yet from those ashes came stability. American troops helped feed children, rebuild schools, and protect Western Europe from chaos. The flag that once symbolized war now represented order and hope. For Europeans, the stars and stripes became more than a banner. It was a promise. America had crossed an ocean not for conquest, but for principle. In the ruins of fascism, freedom found its defender. Years after the war, captured generals wrote their memoirs. Again and again, one theme appeared. They had underestimated America. They thought it was soft, divided, materialistic. They had never understood its unity, its innovation, its spirit. They learned too late that America's strength came not just from machines or factories, but from its people. Ordinary men and women who believed in something larger than themselves. That belief had built fleets, crossed oceans, and reshaped the world. The war ended, but the story didn't. From the ashes of two empires rose one global leader, the United States of America. Its soldiers returned home. Its industries thrived, and its ideals inspired a generation. The Axis had sought domination through fear. America achieved leadership through resolve. From the beaches of Normandy to the skies of Hiroshima, one truth echoed through history. The power of freedom will always outlast the power of tyranny. And in that truth, the world found its new direction. under the unstoppable light of America.